Welcome, everyone, to We the People Extra. I'm Chris Pisano.
And I'm Eric Rosario, together with a team who's been researching, shooting, writing, and editing our We the People series since July of last year. The premise is simple. As we approach our 250th anniversary as a country on July 4th, Chris and I have covered stories that have a historical, culture, or social impact on Western Mass and, more broadly, the United States.
Now, so far, we've traveled throughout the area from Worcester County to Berkshire County, nearly all points in between. Today, we're taking a deeper dive into one of our stories that we shot back in early September and then aired later that month, last year. It's a story about a Civil War soldier from Massachusetts who left behind a remarkable trail of letters. Those letters in that soldier's story might well have been lost to history if it wasn't for the hard work of a local businessman with a passion for the past. We'll speak to him in a moment, but first, here's the story of George Gould.
Stan Prager is a man surrounded by high-tech equipment. It's how he makes his living, repairing, building, and selling computers at his East Longmeadow business, Go Geeks. But here at home in his office, his love of history is on full display.
The connection between these two, technology and history, is I was interested in digitization, and it seemed to me that that was the perfect marriage between history and technology.
He came to that realization while working on his master's degree in history a little more than 10 years ago.
In the course of that, I did a project at the Wood Museum in Springfield, where I digitized a trove of Civil War letters that they had lost and they had found just recently in a chest.
But it wasn't until later, through a friend, that Prager hit upon his passion project.
She said, just happened to pull me aside one day and said, hey, you know, through my family, I came into a collection of Civil War letters from a soldier and was wondering if you'd be interested in seeing them and maybe you could digitize them for me.
The answer was a resounding yes. And as a self-described Civil War nerd, Prager soon found himself wondering about the young man who wrote those letters, George Gould, a farmer from Leicester, who at 29 years old joined the Federal Army of the United States in 1862 and fought on the side of the Union. While there aren't any pictures of Gould, his letters and Prager's extensive research provide great insight into who he was as a man and a soldier.
And while he was gone, his wife, who was 26, died of typhoid fever and leaving 3 orphans. You know, they're 4, 5, 6, 7 years old. They're small children. He was devastated by this loss, and he talks to his mother about it in one of the letters that I have.
In that letter, dated October 12, 1863, he writes,
Dear Mother, it's now about 3 weeks since she died, and I can't realize that I shall see her no more. But if I should live to get home and see the vacant chair and the 3 little motherless children, I shall then realize my great loss.
Gould also speaks of his time in battle, as in this letter from May 14, 1863.
The Rebs were in force about 30 miles from us at a place called Washington. You probably read about it in the papers. They were booming away for 17 days, 15,000 against our 1,500 men.
But it's a letter he didn't write in June of 1864 that had possibly the biggest impact on Prager. One written during the Battle of Cold Harbor in Virginia, informing Private Gould's mother that her son wouldn't be coming home alive.
I have sad news for you. Your son, George W. Gould, was killed and left on the battlefield during a furious charge on a rebel works yesterday morning.
So many soldiers from Massachusetts from his regiment died. He was one of them that was killed on the field there. So while I was reading it, I got like really emotional. I started crying.
And became motivated not just to learn more about Private Gould, but to honor his service and his short life. Here inside Leicester Town Hall, Gould's name is engraved on this monument with 36 other fallen soldiers, but it was the neighboring town of Paxton that actually drew Prager in search of Gould's final resting place.
It was very emotional because I started walking thinking I was going to have to walk through the whole cemetery and find him, and he was right here, you know? He was very near the gate. So I found him really, really soon. So that was surprising. And what I began doing actually was talking to him as if he was like, you know, your grandfather or something, you know, when you went and visited his grave.
He was an old friend at that point.
Well, because I had read the letters.
Prager visits this gravesite several times a year now, cleaning the headstone, placing flags, and keeping Gould's memory alive. That of a simple man from Massachusetts whose patriotism helped save the very country he loved.
He writes in his letters about how important it is to save the Union. And he died. And because he died, we, you know, the Union is preserved and we ended human chattel slavery in the United States. And that's a huge accomplishment.
And joining us now is the guy from that story, Stan Prager, the man whose continued research made George Gould's story come alive for us. You might recognize him. He's no stranger to Western Mass News. And he's also the owner of Go Geeks in East Longmeadow. Stan, thanks for joining us.
Thanks for having me. I appreciate it.
It's my pleasure. I mentioned it when we first did this story. I always thought of you as a high-tech geek. That's your bread and butter, your business. How did you get involved and get a passion for history, things that happened hundreds of years in the past?
Well, I was always interested in history and actually got my undergrad degree in history back at Fairfield U many, many years ago. But it stayed with me over time, and I went back and got my master's degree in about 11 years ago. And when in the course of doing that, I really was struck by the fact that there is room for a marriage of technology and history. So digital archiving is what came to appeal to me. And that is taking materials from the past and digitizing them and making them available to a wider audience. So that was kind of the marriage of history and technology that got me going. It was incidental to this specific project, but it was kind of the general background.
So that's how you got started.
Yeah.
How did you discover George Gould? Because again, we talked about, he's just an ordinary guy. He's not a general. It didn't have an individual necessarily large impact on history. In total, he did with all the soldiers, but why George Gould?
Well, I happened to be working on a project at the Lyman and Mary Wood Museum, Springfield History in the Quad, and there was a girl interning there who was getting her master's degree, and we met and chatted and what have you, and she had told me that she had a relative who was an antique dealer, and they had come upon a collection of letters from this soldier. And she asked me, she knew I was digitizing for the Wood Museum work on the 31st, which was a regiment from Massachusetts that they'd found a trove of letters that had been lost. And so my job was to digitize them so that they could put them up on a website they were creating. So she said, would you be interested in doing this with these letters that I had? And I
said yes.
I said, sure, absolutely. So she loaned me the letters. I scanned them in. I gave them back to her. And, you know, what happened later was kind of not something that was predictable, but I had gone to visit my son in North Carolina. He was going to college there. And I visited the New Bern battlefield. And there's like extant Civil War trenches. Only geeky, nerdy people like myself who are interested in this would be interested in Civil War trenches, but I went there. And then when I came home from this visit, I happened to be, these letters I had scanned, I happened to read them. And when I was reading the letters, I discovered that this guy, George W. Gould, had been at New Bern. They'd created a camp there, Camp Oliver, to train the soldiers. So I'm reading the letters, and it's pretty fascinating learning about this guy, writing home about his wife, his family, you know, good things and bad things that happened to him. And then the last letter is a letter from his commissary sergeant to his mother telling him he's been killed in action. And I was just emotionally taken by this experience.
You said you cried, didn't you?
I did.
When you read that?
I did, because I had just been to New Bern, right? And so I actually had walked that area that this guy had walked, you know, over 150 years ago, right? And here I am sitting in the comfort of my home with a fire burning, and I'm reading these letters, and you know, I find out not only did the guy stationed where I had been, but he later died at Cold Harbor. So, you know, and the fact that he died, of course, is significant. Because he's an ordinary soldier, as you pointed out early on in the intro to this conversation. We learn about history. Kids learn about history. The generals, right? The dates, the battles. They forget all that, right? And why do they forget that? Because there's no connection to them, right? So if your grandfather or great-grandfather fought in, you know, Vietnam or World War II or World War I, whatever, right? He's the guy who made it happen, right? He's the central figure.
Right.
And his story is often lost. So that's why, you know, my work with George W. Gould, the idea is called Resurrecting Lost Voices. That's the title of the website. The idea is we're going to bring his voice back so that people today can understand what it was like to be him.
Now, speaking of connection, you know, I've talked to you about this before. When you started reading these letters, did you realize where it would take you? That you almost had like an emotional attachment? You speak of him as if he was family to you.
Well, I feel that way now, but no, I didn't at the time at all. To me, I mean, I had, scanned all these letters in for the 31st, all these guys who had gone to New Orleans with General Butler. I really didn't have any emotional connection to any of them. This just happened to be really random, that this had come into my, and, there's only a handful of letters, but in some ways, he was a typical Civil War soldier from Massachusetts, and that's what really excited me about it. He was somewhat religious. He cared about his family. He was very passionate about the Union. He was anti-slavery. He had all this stuff built in, but he was also just a private, right? He took it. He joined because there was a signing bonus, right? You get $125, which to us is like, what's going to do at $125, right? You can't even cover dinner in most places today with that, right?
That's the truth.
But then he was a laborer. He made $1 a day was the average wage. So $125 was a fortune, right?
Yeah.
And he's got a wife who's in her 20s, and he's got 3 little girls. And so this is a huge amount of money. So part of it, of course, is patriotism, but the other part of it is, hey, this is going to take care of my family. I don't have to worry about my family while I'm away, right? And then he goes, and of course, he doesn't come home. And that's the tragic ending.
Which is the story for tens of thousands of soldiers in the Civil War. You made the story easy to put together because I think you're a natural-born storyteller. You were passionate about the story. We stopped by your house. We went to the grave site where you eventually found his grave. So when I was writing it, I found it very easy to structure it. But the guy who really works the magic for a story like that is Eric, because as we were talking, in the news, we normally cover events that happen day of, so there's plenty of video opportunity. How do you fill a 3, 4, 5-minute story when there's no video, obviously, from the Civil War or really any history 100, 200, 300 years ago?
It's not easy.
I'll bet.
Luckily, though, today, the internet, we have pictures we can use. I use a lot of pictures. For this story, I get the script and I read it and I try to imagine the shots we have, and there wasn't that much to use for this story. So luckily, we had some pictures, and I was able, through stock footage, to find Civil War reenactors. Get that video, but the video looks too good. It's modern video, so I had to degrade the video, make it black and white, dirty it up a bit, put some pops and stuff like that. So watching it back, I'm still like, there's still something I'm not getting, and that's where I started looking for sound effects. Put some sound effects, and if you listen to it, there's music, Civil War music in the background. You can even hear the quill when he's writing the letters. I put that in the background. That's,
It's the unconscious that you consciously do it, but unconsciously as you watch the story, it makes it that much more impactful. But I think the real linchpin for it was when you presented the letters, and we took excerpts from the letters that George Gould wrote, and you had a great idea to incorporate it into the story.
Yeah, if I remember correctly, when we first did that, you tracked the whole thing.
Yes.
You narrated, you tracked the soldiers' letters, and it was a sergeant who wrote the letter about his death.
Commissary sergeant, yeah.
And when I put it together, there was something missing, and I was like, I think we hear Chris's voice, and it doesn't. Chris is the narrator for that. I needed something a little bit more poignant to, So that's when I went over to another co-worker, Chris Tannen, and I said, could you track the letters for me? Voice the letters
as
if he's writing them. And then, so he did that, and then I needed somebody to play the sergeant. And I was a little pressed for time, so I was like, I'll read the sergeants.
You did a great job.
And I tried to read it as a, little bit of melancholy, but also he probably writes 100 of these letters daily. So almost try to unattached to it.
That was the letter announcing Gould's death.
Yes, to his family, yes.
And that was the one that hit you hard. At what point, Stan, did you decide you were going to take this to the next level? I know you digitized the letters, but then you actually tried to track this man's life down, and you found his grave.
Yes, well, that's how it began. All right, so I scanned the letters in, I transcribed the letters, I decided I'm going to create a website for this guy so other people could read what he wrote, and his voice is truly resurrected, right? So I did that, and then I decided, well, let's do some more research and see if we could find him. So there's a lot of tools available for Civil War research. So it was actually fairly easy to locate his grave. which was in Paxton, Mass. So I drove to the grave, and I found the grave and, you know, put a flag on it, and that was cool. And then I decided to look further. So I used Ancestry to do some research around his family. I discovered, which you know, we visited the Leicester Town Hall, where they have the plaque.
The big memorial.
The big memorial, yeah, because he was one of the people killed at Cole Harbor.
Yeah.
So they created a plaque, which used to be in the GAR Hall. There was, you know, veterans groups across the country. There were GAR groups everywhere, Grand Army of the Republic. And, you know, that place burned down, but the plaque was saved. So we have that big plaque, which we saw. It's sitting now in the town hall in
And
Leicester.
something I learned, not to interrupt you, but
Yeah.
before I forget, it wasn't uncommon for people who died in the Civil War not to have their remains shipped back. So you might have a grave, but the actual person might not be there because they died hundreds of miles away. That was not the case for George Gould, more than likely.
More than likely. It seems apparent that they did ship his remains home. We don't know for 100% fact, but it appears that way. It seems that, you know, he did have money coming to his family from, he had re-enlisted. So he had another sign-on bonus. His wife, tragically, I mean, one of the other things that really choked me up in doing the research was his wife, Amira, got typhoid fever and died while he was away. So she's 26 years old. There's 3 orphan children now, and he's, you know, 1,000 miles away. So,
Yeah.
you know, there's a lot of tragedy to all this. And when you hear his voice in the letters, writing home, writing to his mother about, you know, I can't imagine, you know, what it's going to be like when I get home and I see the 3 motherless children and the vacant chair where Mira sat.
The empty rocking chair, yeah.
He was really, the thing I like about George Gould, and the reason why he stood out to me also, is he was very eloquent, right? And you get that when you read the letters, right? Yeah. He was very eloquent. Here's a guy, he probably wasn't very highly educated, but he could write very, very well. I mean, there's some grammatical errors, but for the most part, the spelling's there, the penmanship's beautiful. And a lot of this goes back to the fact that in New England especially, it was really important that people could read the Bible. So almost everyone was literate. Everyone knew, because you had to, it was incredibly important as a Protestant in Massachusetts and throughout New England, more so than it would be elsewhere in the country. So he could, even though he was not a highly educated person by any means, right? He was just a day laborer, but yet he could write these letters.
And how many did he write?
I believe there's a total of 9. I think there's 12 letters altogether, but you know, some of them are not from him. Some of them are from his wife to his mother. You know, when the wife writes the mother telling him about, she'd heard from George. We only have a few of the letters. There's probably hundreds of letters.
Right.
But we only have this handful of letters. So we don't know what other letters may contain. We've got this sample. You know, he writes to his mom, he writes to his brother, he writes to his sister. You know, but so we don't have the full range of stuff. But what I feel really fortunate in that the letters that we do have, there's some real emotional trauma communicated here, very poignantly and very eloquently.
It's tragic all the way around. As you mentioned, his wife dies, he dies in action. Prior to signing up as a soldier, what did he do? Was he a farmer?
Well, apparently he had, like, when I look in the, if you use Ancestry, it's great, because in the census you could see what people had. At one point he was a shoemaker, but at the time he volunteered, he was a day laborer. So, you know, he basically worked for whatever.
Handyman.
That's how he's listed, exactly.
Gotcha.
So you get hired, you know, you're going to move these stumps, you're going to, you know, do this yard, you're going to do whatever they have you do. So he was not a farmer then. I think he grew up in an agricultural family, but he was not doing that at that point. So, you know, he was just really an ordinary guy. And I can't stress this enough, because that's the most important thing here. It isn't really just about George W. Gould, right? It's about the ordinary soldier in the Civil War or in any war. And so part of the things I did with this is I've tried to launch a project called Adopt a Soldier's Grave, so that people will do the same thing I did. So I found George W. Gould's grave. I go there, I put a flag on it several times a year.
Can we put that video up, by the way? I think we have video of the day we were out there and you showed me his grave. You go, to your point, several times a year to honor the man and his service to our country.
Yes, that's correct.
And how long you been doing that?
Pretty much about 10 years now. I mean, ever since I started the project, you know, really, once I found the grave, I started going. And then one summer, I decided to restore the grave. And to restore the grave, I had to buy archival materials to use for cleaning so you don't damage the stone. And I watched some YouTube videos. And, you know, I'm not an expert here. I'm a computer guy and a history guy. I'm not a gravestone cleaner, but I did what I could. So, you know, and I'll probably have to do it again, because over time, you get lichen and, you know, various other things. So
Of course.
the stone, you know, deteriorates. But you want to keep it looking nice. So, you know, by tending to that grave, again, it's not just him. I'm trying to, like, honor all ordinary soldiers from all wars.
And you've gotten some play out of this. In other words, you've been invited to several groups then to talk about your experience with the letters and George Gould as well.
Yes, that's true. And, you know, again, the marriage of history and technology. What Eric did, by the way, in putting together that piece, which, by the way, I thought was fantastic. I thought I thought it was a great piece. It really was, from the heart. But that's technology, right? That's history and technology.
Yes.
You're using your technology to make that piece that ran. For me, you know, today we can do things like Zoom, which we couldn't do during the Civil War, right? So I'm able to speak to Civil War groups. I spoke to one recently in New Jersey. I spoke to one over the summer in Cape Cod. Without having to visit, there's Civil War roundtable groups. They invite me as a speaker, but I can do it from my office.
And you love to do that, don't you? This is a
I
passion.
enjoy it. I mean, this is kind of an interesting thing because, yeah, I don't make a dime off of this. Like I own Go Geeks. We sell computers. We fix computers. That's what I do as a livelihood. This is something that I do as a passion.
And if folks want to get a hold of you via your website again, or read the letters and learn more about George Gould, where do they go?
ResurrectingLostVoices.com.
ResurrectingLostVoices.com.
And you could also just, you know, Google Stan Prager and George W. Gould, and that'll come up. I mean, it's, you know, the website gets a lot of play.
Excellent.
And I try to update it as I do new things. When I do a talk, you know, if I find a couple of years ago, I was able to get a copy of the flag, the regimental flag, through the state of Massachusetts. So I put that
picture's up there.
That picture's up
Well,
there.
you're pretty good with technology, Stan. So
Well, that's part of
you run a
part
good
of-
website.
It's part of what I do. Part of what I do for a
Thank
living.
you, sir.
Thank you. Thanks
Great
for having
to see
me.
you, my friend.
Thank you.
And that's going to do it for us today, everyone, here on We the People Extra. As always, be safe, and we'll see you soon.